Hi, everybody.
Good evening, Mike.
Welcome to the December meeting of the Wisconsin Chapter of the National Railway Historical Society. Everybody here in the room can hear me okay? Yeah, you can hear me, and everybody out in the Zoom can hear me okay as well? Excellent. So we're recording this this presentation. Kevin Keefe's going to do a great presentation on David P. Morgan's Milwaukee. And we will have it up on the YouTube before too long. So a few announcements before we get started. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge some new members. I don't remember if I acknowledged some folks last month. So I'm gonna just give you everybody who's joined in October and November. Nobody so far in December yet, but in October we had John Lanin from Pewaukee join. Ed Kohler from Bayside, New York. Ed is in the Zoom room here, I noticed. Then in November, we had Fred Ryder from Mount Juliet, Tennessee, join the Wisconsin chapter. Fred, I knew back when literally I was a kid back in New York. He gave me rides to my local chapter of the NRHS back in the early 1970s, back in the day. Mike Slater is now a member of the Wisconsin chapter of the NRHS. Thomas Milkey from Sister Bay joined very recently. And Scott Lotus just joined this week. Scott Lotus from Madison, Wisconsin. He's also the president and executive director of the Center for Railroad Photography and Art. Renewals are coming in. It's easy to renew your membership online. Just go to our website, www.nrhswis.org, and pay $21 online. Very simple to do. Or for those who are in the room right here, as Ralph just did, you can hand Tara, stand up and say hi. You can hand her $20 to renew your membership for 2022. Or just mail it to us, and you'll see the mailing address in Sparks and Cinders and on our website tonight. Speaking of Treasurer Tara, why don't you come up to the microphone here? Tara is going to give us a little report on the status of some donations we received.
Hello, everyone. Good to see you this evening. There was a special effort recently, as I'm sure you've all heard about, making some of these meetings more accessible with audiovisual equipment. And generously, the Friends of the Chapter have donated $1,778 to the equipment purchase.
Yes.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Tara. And thank you to the generosity of all of our donors. We will have a list of all of the donors in the next issue of Sparks and Cinders. So on the 13th of November, a dozen of us went to the Christopher Farm and Gardens, specifically the Christopher Transportation Museum in Sheboygan, in the town of Mosel, just outside of Sheboygan, where we saw J. Christopher's collection of railroad dining car, china, and other ephemera. And a few of us that are in the room today were there. Dick, you enjoyed yourself there? When he says one of the best trips he's been on. And Neil and Kathy, you guys were there for your second time. It was a wonderful trip. Keith, you enjoyed it too. It was, and I did too, and Janet did too. And I think what we're going to try to do, because we enjoyed it so much and they loved having us, was we're going to probably try to have a picnic there in summer, late spring, early summer, a chapter picnic, just as a fun social event. So stay tuned for information on that. That'll be fun, where we get to hang out with Mr. Christopher. You've seen him too. Yeah, right. And it'll be another thing is each of our members who went that day contributed. We wrote out a check to Mr. Christopher's preferred charity, which is the Meals on Wheels franchise in Sheboygan, Fresh Meals on Wheels in Sheboygan, in the amount of $350. So the chapter and everybody who went we're responsible for that. So thank you. So if this works tonight after the meeting for the folks on Zoom, we're going to have an after party. We're going to try to switch the hosting duties over to one of our remote people. Ward, or you're up for that, right?
Yes, sir.
I'm sure Ward is up for that. Yes, good. And
Yeah, I'm good.
Thank you. And anybody who's on the Zoom can continue. We'll turn off the recording and you guys can chatter for as long as you'd like. We thought, though, why not start a new tradition? We have a first Friday meeting. So starting next week, we're going to have a second Friday Gab Fest online for anybody who just wants to join the Zoom, and there's not going to be any program. It's just going to be chatter. Whatever you guys want to talk about, railroads, we're going to make a room available for anybody who wants to participate in Zoom on that. So information will come out next week on our second Friday Gab Fest, which we're going to start on a trial basis. If it works out, we'll keep doing it. So then also on the 21st of December, which is a Tuesday, we're going to have our online slideshow featuring 5 presenters. And those 5 presenters are Mark Lynn, who will be doing a presentation on Santa Fe. Matt Brzezowski went to Colorado this past summer, and he's going to be sharing some of his photos from Colorado. Brian Heckel, I saw Brian in the room here earlier. Brian is going to be doing a program on 20 years of digital photography from Brian. Bon French is going to be doing a program on Rochelle. We're calling it Rochelle, North Central Illinois' transcontinental junction. Very unoriginal because that's the name of the story in the latest edition of First and Fastest that Bon wrote. That he did a lot of research, but he has a large collection of photographs of the Burlington and Northwestern from back in the 50s and 60s. Some incredible stuff. And he's going to be showing some of that on the 21st. And Bon is involved with Kevin at the Center for Railroad Photography and Art. So maybe Kevin can talk to you more about that. And then the final presenter is this guy, Mike Uhas. If you need to know how to spell his name, it should be down the bottom corner of your screen. He'll be doing a program 30 years ago, 1991. So that's all on the 21st of December. It's a Tuesday evening. Then on January 7th, when we start the new year with our first meeting of the year, it's going to, remember back in September when we had our members' favorite slide night, Bob Baker showed a few slides from Milwaukee Road days, some stunning pictures. Well, turns out he just wrote a book, and he's going to be showing a bunch of those photos. We have them scanned, and we're going to be showing them digitally on the 7th of January. So you're going to want to be here for that, either in person or on Zoom. That'll be a good thing. And just a couple of announcements from our friends at the Iowa chapter of the NRHS. They have online slideshows on YouTube. Their next one is Sunday, December 19th at 3 p.m. with Dave Kroger, who is actually a Wisconsin chapter member as well, doing a program on the Iowa Railroad Company, which was the predecessor of today's Iowa Interstate. And they have a calendar for sale. A 2022 calendar is available for $15. And you can find out about that at www.iowanrhs.com. More information about that. I would like to acknowledge a couple of new people, at least one new person here in the room tonight. Eric Hoyam is here from Port Washington. Why don't you, Eric's here in the room. Let's give him a round of applause. Is there anybody else here new that I've missed? Everybody else has been here, but you've been here before. Yeah, she's been here before. Yeah. So with that, I think I'm gonna turn this over to my my longtime friend and former colleague, Kevin Keefe. Kevin was longtime editor of Trains magazine. He started there initially in the 1970s, worked in the promotions department for a couple of years, and that didn't last too long.
It wasn't my thing.
It wasn't his thing, but he ended up getting a job in the Q section here the Let's Go section. At the Sentinel here in town. Eventually ended up going back to work at Kalmbach Publishing, and eventually worked his way up to editor of Trains magazine. publisher, vice president of editorial. He's had all these positions. He's done them all well, and he retired about 5 years ago. And he's a good friend. I'll never forget the time in I'd say it was like 1987, when this guy from Philadelphia just walked in off the street to 1027 North 7th Street, and Kevin Keefe came down and gave him a tour of the place. Well, the next thing I know, I ended up working there myself. So
Did we go up on the roof on that trip?
we might have gone up on the roof. I don't recall that. I don't recall that I was ever up on the roof of that
No,
building.
I swear we went up on the roof. It was really hot.
No, okay,
Summer day.
it was a summer day. It was that. I remember that. And
Not that the roof's anything special. but
indeed, well, in any event, he doesn't have a microphone on him, so he's going to move over to this chair. Would you please give a warm welcome to Kevin Keefe, ladies and gentlemen? Just get this up and running for you. Ah.
Well, thanks, Mike. That's great. Yeah, Mike and I have been working together for a long time. Anyway, thanks, Mike. It's great to be here. I've been coming to these meetings, even back in the 70s, it was in this room, I believe. I remember those meetings. I think Dave Ingalls was even an officer in the chapter for a while, wasn't he, Tom?
Yes, he was.
That's great. That's great. Wow. Well, good for you. Well, I feel very welcome here. Of course, I make some meetings during the year too, and I am a member. I'm a dues paying member, so I'm glad about that. So my program tonight, David P. Morgan's Milwaukee. For this audience, I feel like I need to make an explanation before we get going. This is a program I put together. This is an expanded version of a program I put together a couple months ago for the NRHS National Convention. They asked me to be their dinner speaker. Maybe some of you were there that night. And so I thought, well, I'm not a shooter. I'm not like Dave Ingalls. I can't raid my slide collection and come in here with an hour and a half on the GM&O or the Wabash or anything like that. The only thing I have to raid is Hoffman's library. So I decided to put together a program with maybe a special kind of twist to it. And that would be, I figured everybody that was coming to the convention here from around the country would know Morgan, would know that name. And maybe we could have a little fun with showing them Milwaukee railroading by sort of pretending that we're kind of visiting Milwaukee as Morgan saw it back in the day. So that's where I came up with the title. And you'll see a sprinkling of a few photographs of Morgan in here. 90% of it are just train pictures. And I would, in some cases, you might see stuff or captions written that you might think, well, wow, doesn't everybody know that who lives around here? Well, just keep in mind that this program was created for people from New Jersey and Arizona or wherever. So it was created for people who don't know their way around Milwaukee. But I also encourage anybody who has any thoughts about the pictures I'm showing, or if there's any details that I miss about explaining what's in the picture, you won't be able to be heard on the mic, but please jump in and just, tell us what you want to tell us, because I want this to be fun. It'd be nice to be an exchange, especially since all of us kind of live around here. And a lot of these pictures are going to be kind of familiar to us, even if we were not around when they were taken. So I started out with this photograph of David because it's one of the earliest photos I've ever seen of him when he had just come to work at Kalmbach. In fact, I think it's possible he had not come to work at Kalmbach yet when this was taken. I think it's possible this photo was taken the day he came to interview for his first job at Kalmbach in about 1947. He was born in 27, so he's only 20 years old in this picture. And he's standing next to, I think, an A-class Atlantic on the Milwaukee down at the station downtown. And what's really remarkable, and shame on me for not putting a photo credit on this photograph, but that photograph, this portrait was taken by the great Richard J. Cook. And some of you may know his name from Rails Across the Midlands. He was for many years an editor and photographer for the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers. Richard J. Cook is one of the great photographers. So it was just neat that they I don't know if it was coincidental, but they were both here together on that same weekend. So that's David. Well, okay, this map is just about anybody in this room is pretty elementary stuff. This is a map Kalmbach created several years ago for something else. I don't remember what it was for. I know Jim Rins out there in the audience tonight. Maybe he can remember. what this was for, but this is a depiction of Milwaukee railroads about 1948. And I included this map, obviously, for all these out-of-towners that were here this past summer, just to give them, sort of orient them toward Milwaukee. But you can see in the, the middle, kind of lower right-hand side, how everything kind of comes together downtown. The Northwestern's in green, the Milwaukee's in orange, and the North Shore's in blue. Those are the three main railroads we're going to see today. So, and then the map will show up a couple more times. I just wanted to keep reorienting people to what they were seeing. But we're going to start out downtown and then work our way around from downtown. In fact, we're going to start right here, 1027 North 7th Street, in a photograph taken in the early 1950s. Many of you know about the MATC parking garage that's next to the Kalmbach building. Well, you can see this is before that was built. And I'm judging from the cars that this is around 1950, something like that. I don't remember what the buildings were on the left, but they were not there much longer. That became a parking lot for MATC. Of course, everything here looks totally different now. But back when I came to work here in 1974, I was on the 5th floor looking down over the street. That was the sales department where I wrote ad copy for Kalmbach. But it's I wanted to include this picture just because, well, for a lot of people in this room, it's probably nostalgic to see it because a lot of us remember the building, but also this is where Morgan worked. And here's an early photograph of Morgan in his office with the November 1952 issue of Trains and Travel. Some of you might recall that for a brief year and a half or so, Trains appended and Travel to its name. So the name of the product wasn't Trains, it was Trains and Travel. And to the best of my knowledge, the reason this was done was because with the demise of steam, Trains' readership began to sink. Lots of rail fans thought, if there's no steam, I'm out of it. And in order to broaden the appeal of the magazine, the company changed the name to Trains and Travel to see if they could get, just people who are members of the traveling public to pick up the magazine. Didn't last long. But there's a young David at age 25 in the office. Here's another shot, which I love, of David around the same time. In fact, I have the exact date here, February 28th, 1952. This is Morgan gathering the staff around him and Marilyn. If you check what's underneath the glass on his desk, you might recognize the face of the woman under the glass. And standing behind him, our associate editor, Rosemary Entringer, on the left, who later became managing editor and a very influential member of the train staff. In the middle, the great Wally Abbey, who at that time was managing editor and took the photograph with a timer. And then on the right is editorial secretary Katie McMullen, who later stayed at Kalmbach long enough to ascend to the editorship of her own magazine, which was called Better Camping. Kalmbach published a magazine called Better Camping in the late 50s and early 60s, and then they sold it. But I love this picture because it's Morgan is so young, and the staff, frankly, is so young. And I just love the picture of Marilyn Monroe because he would never get away with that in a million years at Kalmbach today. I can guarantee you that. So let's walk down the street from Kalmbach. If you walked south along 6th Street, you made a jog over to 6th Street from 7th Street at the 1027, and then walked south. Eventually, you'd get to the corner of 6th and Michigan, and many of you will recognize this building either from seeing it, maybe, if you're old enough, or looking at photographs. Here's a wonderful photograph of the wonderful North Shore Station, downtown Milwaukee. And there's so much to look at in this photograph. The old cars are fantastic. The catenary for the electric bus line on Michigan Street, you can see up in the sky. Streetcars are gone by now on this line. And in fact, they're gone all over the city by the time this was taken. And then also notice the Sentinel delivery truck on the left. The Milwaukee Sentinel building back at this point was down on Michigan Street right at the river. There's a fairly new building there now that's the headquarters of, oh shoot, I can't think of the name of it. No, it's Nordberg or whatever became Nordberg. Anyway, that's where the old Sentinel building was. It was just like the Journal building, a giant city newspaper with printing presses in the bottom floor and everything. So there's a Sentinel truck. And then you see this wonderful architecture of the North Shore, including that great billboard on the corner, 38 fast trains daily. Almost unimaginable from the perspective of today. So we're going to hang out at the Milwaukee North Shore Station for a few minutes here. Here's a great shot taken near the end, maybe the very last day, probably. I don't know why the Milwaukee Sentinel would bother to take this picture other than the fact that it might have been the last day. A trainman attending to a Chicago-bound train of Silverliner cars in January 1963. And I love this photograph just because I wish I knew who the photographer was, because I might have known him from my days at the Sentinel. But that's a shot that he probably got permission to get down on the track to shoot, and that's not a shot that you normally see rail fans shoot, that's for sure, at least back in that era. Here's a shot taken, I believe, shortly after the station was closed. So it's still standing, it's still intact, but it's empty later that year. And this photograph was taken by somebody at Kalmbach, probably Art Schmidt, who was our photographer for 40 years and a great old guy who took a lot of great photos for me too back when I was there. But you see the Hotel Schrader on the right and the building on the left, which is now mostly condominiums, I believe. And in the distance, far in the distance to the left, you can see MATC's main building. If you went inside the North Shore building station, here's what the lunch counter looked like 2 days before the January 63 abandonment. And I think that's a very bittersweet photograph. And I wish I'd had a chance to sit at one of those stools and order a burger or something like that at some point in my life. Just walk a couple hundred feet south of the station, and this is what you'd see anytime a Chicago-bound train rounded the curve to cross over the Menominee Valley on the 6th Street Viaduct. I don't know if anybody recognizes that name, Mert Leet, the photographer. I know that name from somewhere, but I don't know why. But what a great shot of cars, the city skyline, such as it was back then, and of course the North Shore train, and a nifty looking Studebaker right in the middle of the photograph. Here's a shot John Gruber got looking the other direction from approximately the same location, looking south across the 6th Street Viaduct. And of course, if you lived in Milwaukee in those days, one thing you got used to seeing was a heck of a lot of sailors downtown in Milwaukee who came up from North Chicago, Glenview down that way, to spend their time off, their leisure time here in the city of Milwaukee. And they were big patrons of the North Shore. And here's an Electroliner coming into town from Chicago. Wonderful photograph of an Electroliner heading south across the 6th Street Viaduct on June 1949. And I remember it wasn't all that long ago, maybe 20, 25 years ago, you could still see where the tracks were in that bridge. They'd been covered over with some sort of metal plate. And of course, the catenary supports were long gone. But I remember that bridge, and it almost makes me feel like I might have witnessed this scene here, but of course I never did. Another great shot by John Gruber showing Electroliner pausing at 5th and Mitchell in June 1962. And not only is this a cool photograph because it shows the street running in Milwaukee, but I just think it says something about John Gruber. You know, a lot of railroad photographers would move heaven and earth to get the car parked over by the side of the street and shoot the train, from the sidewalk at a 3/4 angle, action shot, whatever. And I really think John got this shot because he knew that the story he wanted to tell was what it was like to contend with the North Shore if you were a motorist using 5th Street on the south side of Milwaukee. And this does a good job of that. Kind of reminds me of going up and down Ogden Avenue now with the hop in my windshield, although the Electroliner's far cooler, obviously. Here we are on the eve of the North Shore's discontinuance. In fact, it's the night before. It's literally the eve. An Electroliner pauses at Harrison Avenue where the shops were on a cold winter night by John Gruber. Looks like there's looks like there's a fair amount of people on board for what maybe was the last run. Love this shot because I'm down in this neighborhood on a fairly regular basis. And of course, nothing like this looks like this at all anymore. But if you're down there, standing there looking at what this little piece of the old North Shore right-of-way looks like, this picture just looks like a mirage. But here we have an Electroliner heading south for Chicago over the intersection of 6th and Oklahoma. I think we're standing about in the parking lot of a McDonald's today. And on the left side is a Walgreens, I think. And isn't that a magnificent bridge? It just says something about Insull, the money Insull put into that railroad back in the 20s. And this is from, it's a George Cramble's photograph, so no surprise, it's a wonderful shot. Oh, and look at the streetcar shelter there, I take it, on the street. I assume that's what that is. Well, this is what the North Shore Depot looks like today. Now, I included this for this national audience a few months ago, so you'll see occasional pictures of Milwaukee that I know that you know darn well what these places look like now, but I threw these in anyway. And of course, what a come down. I mean, this isn't, I'm sure it's a perfectly nice corporate office building, but it sure doesn't stand a comparison with the North Shore station. Although a few months ago, there was good news that Milwaukee Tool, which is a fabulously successful manufacturer, is moving its corporate headquarters into this building. So next, okay, Morgan has spent some time at the North Shore station. He probably had a burger at the counter there. Well, he couldn't get a drink there, I'm sure, but then he, you know, it's late afternoon and he's off work. Now he's going to work his way east along Michigan Street. And the next thing he would encounter, of course, would be Zeidler Park. I don't think it was called Zeidler Park then, but it's still a wonderful park and it looks pretty much like it did back then. And here he would have encountered the public service building, and at least up through 1950, and this probably was taken in the late 40s, the presence of interurban cars coming in and out of the back of the building. And I love this photograph because all these people are having their lunch break or whatever in the park, and there's these incredible interurban cars, and it's nothing to them, you know, it's just routine, not a big deal. Of course, this is what it looks like today. Thank goodness the building was saved. Thank goodness the building has been thoroughly restored. It's a beautiful building. It's an important building. And I love the way We Energies saw to it that the old garage doors were they were given a new treatment, but that's, to me, I interpret that as sort of an homage to the interurban station. What's behind those green doors now is a huge data processing computer center for We Energies. So Morgan kind of glanced at the Milwaukee Electric Terminal. Now he turns to his right, and of course here is a real gem, the main entrance to the Milwaukee Road Station on Everett Street. And I never saw this. By the time I moved to Milwaukee in 1974, the station was gone. But I love the way that the Milwaukee took this late 1880s Gothic looking brick pile, and in the 1930s pasted on an Art Deco bit of typography on the main door, which doesn't really fit with the architecture of the station, but looking at it from our perspective today, it's pretty darn cool, I think. I would have given anything to walk through those doors. Of course, here's what it looks like now. Nothing wrong with the building except that it's completely and utterly boring. Go back to the station days. If you walked inside, here was the waiting room and the ticket offices. Longtime workplace of Jim Scribbins, a friend of many people in this room, I assume, a very dear friend of mine, the late Jim Scribbins, and we'll see his name pop up once or twice more in the program. And I know for a fact that Morgan, sometimes when he got off work in the afternoon, he'd make a beeline for the Milwaukee station just to hang with his buddy Scribbins and talk about passenger trains and passenger schedules and sift through timetables and that kind of thing. And I assume this is where all that happened. Now we get outside, and here's the true magnificence. Many of you probably know this photograph. This was the cover photograph for the Indiana University Press book, Wallace W. Abbey, A Life in Railroad Photography, that the Center for Railroad Photography and Art produced for Indiana. And I was a co-author with my colleague Scott Lotus on that book, and we chose this photo for the cover. It's just about a perfect railroad photograph by Wally Abbey, taken in around 1950, showing the morning Hiawatha behind F7s at the east end of the station. The clock tower is still intact. Many of you will recall that later there was a fire that kind of took the top of the clock tower off. And there's still a water plug there. And of course, over on the side, there's some baggage and express cars being unloaded. And just beyond the express building, you see the little corner of the Milwaukee Public Service building. Here's a shot looking the other direction from approximately the same spot. This is a pretty well-known photograph from Jim Scribbins' book, The Hiawatha Story. When I came to Kalmbach in '74, my boss was Bill Aiken Jr., this guy, the credit line. Bill was the vice president in charge of sales then. But back in 1950-ish, when he took this photograph, 1947, he was a member of the art department staff and a very good photographer. And Bill got this shot of the southbound morning Hiawatha going through the corridor of buildings down there, all of which in the foreground are gone to make way for today's 794. Another shot of the beaver tail looking the other direction by Lynn Westcott, legendary editor of Model Railroader magazine. A beaver tail brings up the markers of the afternoon Hiawatha arriving, 1938. This is pre-war. But a great view of the public service building and the Hotel Schrader and just that overall scene down there. And a great car, designed, I believe, by Otto Kuhler. This is a wonderful shot by H.M. Stange. I don't know who that was. Maybe somebody here is familiar with that name. I don't know if he was a Milwaukee guy or from Chicago or whatever. But another great shot of the station before it was kind of wrecked by when they took the tower off it. And there's lots to see here. The Fairbanks Morse cab unit, the switchers on the left, another steam engine beyond the switcher, and then, of course, a streamlined Pacific marching out of town with one of the lesser Hiawathas. I don't know which one. But Clybourne Avenue certainly doesn't look like that anymore. Yeah, I was guessing it's a Chippewa Hiawatha because it didn't usually merit a Pacific. Yeah. And look at the kid on the bike. I mean, I hope he appreciates what he's seeing, you know. Other direction, other side of the train shed. Here's train 10 from Green Bay under the train shed behind a Fairbanks Morse Erie built by somebody named B.L. Stone. I don't know who that was. And a steam engine probably in switching service on the track next to it. A shot I discovered just recently the other day by Lynn Westcott again, a flagman waiting to protect the departure of the eastbound morning high in October 1947. I don't know anything about the history of traffic accidents down there, but with all those trains coming in and out and all the streets crossing those tracks at either end of the train shed, I have to believe once in a while there were some altercations. This is a shot that I think is just, the whole idea of a set out sleeper is very romantic to me. You know, you go into a city that's not the end of the line and you get your room on the sleeping car and you settle in for the evening, and sometime in the middle of the night, your car gets picked up. And that was the case here with the set out sleeper Gallatin River, a Milwaukee road sleeper, awaiting the arrival of the westbound Pioneer Limited by many of the people in this room were friends with Bob Bullerman. I don't know when he took the picture, but it's a great photograph. Here's another one I found just the other day, a westward view along the freight line into the, what's it called, Muskego Yard. Switcher approaching the 6th Street Viaduct on the freight-only track along the south side of the river. And it's just a nice shot of an everyday occurrence here in Milwaukee. And what's interesting to me about this photo, beyond just the railroad stuff, which is cool, is, well, I like the Blatz billboard over there along the viaduct, but I also love the P&V, you know, tanning company building in the background, which is now very much alive as a office building, you know, completely restored. Near the same neck of the woods, just a few hundred yards away, you could get this photograph of the westbound Hiawatha approaching at Florida Street, a half mile south of the station. And this picture came from Dave Ingalls' collection. Apparently he didn't take it. Well, I'm sure he didn't take it. He would have been too young to get this, but I'm sure some of us know the restaurant off to the right there. I can't think of the name of it now, the Irish Bar. Yes, great place. Yep. It's if you survive, you can get really hammered. Okay, Milwaukee Road 464, Baltic, they called it on the Milwaukee, leading a train through Milwaukee's south side. I wish I could be more specific about where this was. The only clue is all that industrial stuff to the left. Makes me wonder if this is, you know, somewhere near the Solvay, or yeah, maybe, or somewhere down that way. But man, he's moving. Elwood Pate, I don't know who that was, but it's quite a photograph. And here's a location familiar to everybody in this room, probably. I'm quite certain this is Waterford Avenue as it looked. I'm sure it wasn't called Waterford Avenue then. It was probably, I don't know what it was called then. It's just a dirt road, but this is Powerton down there near the town of Lake Water Tower. And here we have a freight extra climbing the hill toward Lake in November 1951. And I love this photograph. I just love the fact that you can see the entire train. You can see the engine up front working. And I also love the fact that Art Schmidt took this photograph, because 99% of Art's career at Kalmbach as the company photographer was taking people pictures or photographs of model railroad equipment or pictures of the building or the renovations we were making. But this proves that Art could go out there with his 4x5 and get a darn good train picture too when he wanted to. And of course, like in many people in this room, I've spent many happy hours down there watching trains come and go. So that's, we'll take a break from the Milwaukee Road for a bit here and go back to Morgan. So now Morgan is hung out at the Milwaukee station for a while, and his evening's not over yet. He's now going to walk 7 or 8 blocks east along Michigan till he gets to arguably Milwaukee's most beautiful train station, the Northwestern Lakefront Depot. And this is a fantastic picture Rob McGonigal gave me by a guy named Chuck Youngkirth. Well, actually, it's from his collection. I'm not sure who took it. But a great shot of a Pacific moving out of town with one of the lesser Northwestern trains heading west. But it's interesting to me how recognizable this scene is, despite all the things that have changed. I mean, the wall is gone, the station's gone, the train shed's gone, the railroad's gone, but that sweep of Wisconsin Avenue coming up around the curve, it looks very much like it does today in front of the Northwestern Mutual Building. Here's a shot from the state from the other side of the station in the flight in the 50s of the Twin Cities 400 left, meeting the Peninsula 400 at the station on what looks to be a kind of a cold afternoon. This is the only shot I've seen, I'm sure there's others out there, of the interior of the lakefront station. Apparently this is the stairway that would take you down to the waiting room from the curve on Wisconsin Avenue. And it was just taken 5 days before the suspension of the Twin Cities 400. So it's a significant photograph in that aspect. And you see the wonderful sign over the arch there in the waiting room. Beautiful building, and what a shame that somebody didn't have the imagination and wherewithal to somehow save it. Here's another wonderful shot by Wally Abbey. This to me is every bit the equal of his beautiful, perfect photograph of the Milwaukee station. Well, here's another one of the Northwestern station. The westbound Twin Cities 400 pauses at the lakefront in June 51. I'm 3 months old when he took this photograph, which just blows my mind. So much to see here. The airstrip over there where the Summerfest grounds are on the left. The smokestacks of what I assume was even then the waste treatment plant of the, the Jones Island thing. But not much else is familiar. The Hone Bridge would be in the middle of all this now. And then of course that wonderful, wonderful Romanesque train station on the right. Well, that's what it looks like now, folks. Sorry. I'm standing in virtually the same place Wally did. I took this photograph a couple years ago. And for my national audience a few months ago, I think thought they'd get a kick out of seeing how much it's changed. Pretty darned unrecognizable, unless you know exactly what you're looking at. So if we turn around and head north along those same railroad tracks, this is a view that somebody named Joe Barth got from Bob Baker's collection of the Peninsula 400 coming into town in the late 1950s. The Peninsula 400 arriving at Milwaukee along the Oak Creek Trail, bike trail. I guess the Oak Leaf bike trail is better than having nothing, right, folks? But wouldn't we much rather have this? Yep. Now we're going the other direction from the lakefront station, and I love the next 2 or 3 photographs. This is what now is the Summerfest parking lot for the most part, and the Italian Community Center. But this was what it looked like when the Northwestern had coach yards and an engine terminal in the 3rd Ward. Unfortunately, I do not have a photograph that shows the roundhouse, the little 18 stall or whatever roundhouse over to the left. I know it was over to the left because on Google satellite photos, up until about 3 years ago, you could see the footprint over to the left, barely visible through the weeds of the old roundhouse. But then the Milwaukee Ballet put in their new practice facility and obliterated the footprint of the roundhouse. So can't see it anymore, but it's there. It's out of sight in this photograph. But you can see the coaling tower and a Pacific and a lot of activity. And of course, you can see the Northwestern Mutual's original headquarters in the background over to the left side, and the Cudahy Apartments and the clock tower of the Lakefront Station. This is an even cooler photograph in my mind because it shows a troop train just kicking, hauling out of town, I'll put it politely, in 1951, hustling a train out of Milwaukee, in a photograph by Al Kalmbach himself. The main recognizable things here being the Wisconsin Gas Company building, which in this photograph looks like it did not have the flame yet. Yeah, interesting. And then the Northwestern Mutual Insurance Company there, that boxy building barely visible. But what a great shot of how busy it was down there in those days. Here's a shot at the Erie Street Engine Terminal. The Brown House is right nearby, but I don't have that. But I do have this wonderful shot of a 282 getting a fresh supply of sand and a photograph by Lynn Westcott. And Lynn was a very good photographer. And I thought this was a very perceptive photograph of a railroader at work. Near the same spot, looking the other direction toward the southwest, this is what it looked like on a tough winter's day. The photograph is not, there's no notes on the back of it, so I don't know when this was. I would assume it's the late 1940s, given when pictures tended to be contributed to trains, but it's hard to know. But we have a switcher moving some cars in and out of the yard there, I guess. And of course, the grain elevator at the right, I think that's still there. And for the purposes of our national audience, I included this photograph of that very same scene taken this past summer, which I think is pretty cool. I mean, would I rather see the previous photograph still existing there? Sure. But this is pretty cool. The tower has been preserved. For what purpose, I do not know. But thank goodness it's been beautifully preserved. There's a park there now where it's a nice place to hang out. And the bridge, I understand, isn't going anywhere. It's just too much of a hassle to cut it up. So I think whoever owns it or whoever is responsible for it's going to leave it there. Is it really? Yeah. Sign me up. Yeah, I'd like to stay there. Anyway, it's interesting to see what's happened to that.